In the third part of tonight's class, we focused on the circumcision as expressive of the intrinsic relationship we have with God. How does that reflect in our life? How does that reflect in our children's? So the bris is different than other mitzvahs because all other mitzvahs are creating new bonds with God. The bris is revealing our existing connection with God. Like if you have a dark room, you turn on lights. You turn on many lights, many mitzvahs, many lights, or you remove the dark coverings from the windows to allow the sunlight to stream in. If you turn on a light, there's creating a limited amount of light. If you're uncovering the windows, it's limitless light. So turning on a light, that's doing on a mitzvah. Every mitzvah is a new connection with God. Every mitzvah draws new energy into the world. When you're letting the sunlight in, that uncovers your intrinsic bond that we already enjoy with God. So I think, I know we're sort of running out of time, but I did want to focus on this a little bit as this part of the spirituality of the bris, and for ourselves as parents, thinking about this idea of how do I express this intrinsic bond with God? And how do I help my children recognize it? Which again, as we were saying, often our expressing it is helping our children recognize it. But any thoughts on that? How do you express your intrinsic bond with God? Where do you feel it's intrinsic, it's natural, this is just you? What part of your relationship with God expresses this intrinsic bond? And how do you share that with your children?
I think like you said before, the kids just see the way you daven. They see if you give tzedakah, how you treat other people. Even just mentioning God. Oh my gosh, thank you Hashem for, having the right amount of, I guess ingredients for my recipe. Just everything is God, and they pick up on it. It just comes from what they, hear and see you doing.
So you're saying by you, the intrinsic bond is just expressed in all the details of your life. And as you're articulating all those things, they pick it up. So they get it too.
Yeah, it's everything. Even like, I don't know, after Havdalah, okay, everyone gets tzedakah now before you start the new week. Like just every little thing. And the kids they just do it now. It's just something that's part of like their day and their, or like, I took one of my kids to get sushi the other day, and the whole thing fell on the floor. He was so upset. And I'm like, it's okay. It's meant to be. He's like, what are you going to tell me? Maybe it was like poisonous or something. So Hashem was protecting me. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to tell you. That's so funny. So stuff like that, just recognizing it's going to happen. It already happened. You don't run the world. And like, yeah, it was so cute. He was only 9. And I'm like, I love that he thought that way. He was so aggravated. He said it like a very aggravated tone, but he got the message. And it was very sweet.
And that's he got the message because he heard you say it more times than he could remember. So he knows that's the message. And even if he's resentful now of the message because he lost his whatever, but underneath it, he knows that's the message. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyone else has seen that with their children or with themselves? Parts of their relationship with God that they just feel are just intrinsic. What I mean by intrinsic means like, if you're really working on yourself to dress modestly, that's not expressing your intrinsic bond. That's like a lot of work on your part. It's focus. But there's parts that are just natural. It's just you. It's just like Yael's example about her mother. That was a beautiful expression of that intrinsic bond. That religious, not religious, on her tongue is always going to be Hashem. Religious, not religious. She's going to spend 15 minutes by her candles. It's just intrinsic. It's just who she is. So anyone can think of thoughts like that about themselves?
I think that my love of davening, I think is definitely because of my mom. I always saw her davening, and I'm always davening, and I was always just, I don't know, I was upset if my girls and my boys were not into it. Now I see that they really are. And I mean, my older girls, I see how they're davening, and they really have a lot of kavanah. And I feel like I got it from my mom. And like when I go over and I bring my baby over to my parents' house, my mom's davening. I was like, oh, this is definitely where I got it from. And I see how much kavanah she has. And I see that that's where I got it from. And think that I passed it on to my kids. And I feel like that's intrinsic. Like, I feel like everything in my life, I feel like is attributed to, that it was hard work, and it came from davening, davening twice a day, Tehillim, like always my skula, tefillos, like I would, I don't know.
It's so interesting what you're saying and how you pass on to your children. I actually experienced sort of the opposite, meaning I also, I don't know if I love to daven. I definitely work on davening, and I definitely can get into davening. And I remember one year, I don't remember which child it was, whatever. I think I do, but it doesn't make a difference. It was Yom Kippur, and I was with this child in shul, which is quite unusual, because usually if I'm in shul Yom Kippur, that means someone else is watching my younger kids. So I don't remember exactly how it worked. But I was in shul with this child. It was Yom Kippur. I'm not usually in shul, but it was Yom Kippur. And I was all into it. I love shul. I love davening. I love, the spirituality of Yom Kippur. And I was looking at my kid, who was just normal, so therefore not loving any of it. And I was like, you know what? Their relationship to God isn't mine. And that's fine. And that's fine. They're going to be their best self, and they have their path. They have their journey. They have their reason why in this world. And it's probably not to be a governor, but that's fine. As long as they do what they got to do, it's fine. So I think it's really special that your children have sort of naturally absorbed that from you in the positive way. And I would say, again, because I am a davener, and my kids definitely know I'm a davener, they definitely see me daven and make fun of, all whatever davening and the time I spend on it. Not in a harsh way, but just like whatever, joke. And I haven't seen it click with all of them. And I think that's sort of interesting, as I'm saying, looking at different children. Obviously, we could sometimes put a pressure on our children, like, I want my child to be like me, or at least my good parts. And sometimes we could do that, and sometimes we sort of need to just be and pray and hope that it'll trickle in. And I think you're very blessed that this davening piece did, as you're saying, from your mother to you to your daughters. That's so beautiful. And maybe some of your children won't have it, but then you might pick up some other piece of you, some other beautiful piece that they just picked up without work, because it's out there.
But not until they were, I see it now, like that they're the older ones, the 20-year-old, 18-year-old is also really, and I don't know if it's me, definitely not all me. They learn it in school and whatever, but they see it from me at home, and they know that it's very important to me. And my 16-year-old, like I see it, and then my 14-year-old son too, like I see that. I think it's age, it's a maturity thing. It's definitely a maturity thing, but I think that it's.
And that's what I was saying to you, Elle, before about, her kids in their 20s still rolling their eyes. It's okay. Then there'll come a time. Or her kids not yet spending 15 minutes by the candles. There'll come a time. So I think it's sort of like, and I'm glad you raised that, Chevy, because it's triggering this in my head. And I think it's an important point to mention, not that we should have, that we should understand more. We should understand realistically. Whatever you are, your children are getting. That doesn't mean they're going to absorb and reflect everything, or it doesn't mean they're going to do it today. Maybe they're going to do it in 20 years. I can remember so many different people have said to me, it's so amazing. I thought my child was so resentful and not absorbing anything, and I see they put their kids to bed the same way I put them to bed. Yeah. So sometimes it takes 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes it takes them becoming parents. And we do see that they have absorbed, they were hearing the whole time. They have become like the virtues that we try to live, and hopefully live in a joyous, positive way. But sometimes they're not going to necessarily have those virtues. Doesn't mean they're bad. They might have other strengths of yours, but that strength they're not going to have. And I think we all need to have sort of that give and take of knowing to put it out without creating a pressure of, no, you have to reach this bar, and if you don't reach this bar, it's a problem. It's not a problem, but it's a beautiful bar. And I so love it, and I'm so fed by davening. And hopefully, just as your children see that you're fed by davening, and you love davening, and you're talking to Hashem, and you view it as an opportunity, and as they mature, they want that too. And maybe even these kids that don't seem like daveners will become daveners maybe 5 or 10 years after they leave your house, because it finally clicked. Or maybe when they're in a more difficult situation, it'll click, because that was a vision they always had of their mother davening. So like when they need it, it's there. So it's sort of like a delicate thing. On one hand, we want our children to have these advantages. At the same time, we have to say, I trust that I'm putting it out. I trust it's getting absorbed. I know every child is different. I'm different. Me and all my siblings are different. We were all raised in the same home. I'm sure most people here are different than their siblings. They were all raised in the same home and exposed to the same parents. So I trust my children are absorbing, and each one will reflect this beauty in their own special way. And I might merit to see it now. I was saying when they're 14, which is incredibly young, or 16, or 18, or 20, or maybe after they're married, or maybe after they have children, or maybe when they get into their 30s or 40s. We should merit to be here with our children, and we should merit to see that gradually, these pieces of beauty that you might never have thought they were noticing, they've actually become, and beyond. The Talmud says, "Yafa koyacha av yafa koyacha ben mikoyacha av," which means the power of the son is even nicer, it's even finer, it's even greater than the power of the father, which really has a dual meaning. On one hand, it means our children should hopefully surpass us. And it also means that though they are surpassing us, their roots are us. So we would all want our children to surpass us as givers, to surpass us as selfless, to surpass us as daveners, to surpass us in their spiritual circumcision, and know what they're doing all comes from us. Miriam?
No, I was going to say, Chavi, when you were talking about that, it also struck the chord. And exactly like you, Mrs. Turn, I daven twice a day, say my Parak Shira, whatever. My kids see it. And not all of them are on my page with it. And that's okay. I've grown to accept it. One of my kids, I used to hawk about it. And I saw it was going in a different direction. And then I realized I better stop. I just better stop. And I did. And so, everyone in their own way. That's it. That's what I've come to realize.
Might very well be that when your children are in their 40s, they might become daveners. And they might never even realize it came from you, or they might. Just like so many things, how we become our parents, hopefully in the good ways. And not even like we're trying to be like our parents. It's just something enrooted very deep in us. And maybe when your children are going through a situation in life where they need Hashem's help, they need God in their life, and they might just start davening, even without realizing, but because it's something they absorb. So I think it's really good, Miriam, that you don't like push your kids. I don't push my kids with davening. I don't.
With one of them I did.
I don't push them.
With one of them I did, and I saw it. This isn't going very well, so I think I better stop.
Yeah, and I think it takes wisdom to know. And some children can absorb it, and it can be loving, and it can be positive. And I had someone reach out to me recently, and she said, actually it was about davening, and she said she could daven herself, and she davens very well, or she could say far less, but sing it with her child and make davening a beautiful experience between her and her child. So I told her, of course, she should do both. But it's a really nice idea. Even a little piece, I mean, her children are also young. You're talking about maybe 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-old. I mean, that ballpark of children, not teenagers. But it was just, and I know, because I've been in her house Friday night, and I've seen her sing the davening with her child, with her children, with her daughters, and it's so beautiful. I never did that with any of my kids, but it's so beautiful. So it sometimes just happens by osmosis, or like Chavi said, they see your example and they just mature and want it. Sometimes we don't see it, and sometimes we can proactively, like what this woman's saying, is say, well, I do love davening, and I do want my children to love davening. So sort of going back to what Aliza said, I won't call it a fun experience, but like a nurturing, bonding, sweet, enjoyable, positive experience, making davening something that the kids like doing with their mother. Now, she was telling me also how, like, in terms of saying Tehillim, she could say Tehillim herself and do far more, or she could say Tehillim with her children and do far less, but her kids say Tehillim and enjoy it. So, there's always that toss-up of, if we have this this vision of what we want to give our children, how can we make it positive, enjoyable, as Eliza said, fun? How can we make it inviting? That's probably the best word for it. How can we make davening inviting, not harsh, not I'm disappointed, but how can we make it inviting that the children want it and live up to it? But again, if we don't see it now, maybe we'll see it when they're 20, and maybe we'll see it when they're 25, and maybe we'll see it when they're 35, and maybe we'll see it when they're 45. But I do believe that whatever we implant, the good stuff, we should see flower. All right, well, we didn't get too far in our discussion on circumcision, but hopefully you can see some ideas of circumcision and spirituality and ourselves as parents. Thank you so much for joining. So appreciate everyone's input. That's what makes the class special. Thank you so much for joining.